According to research from the National Longitudinal Study, only about 39% of autistic students who pursue a postsecondary education earn a degree within 8 years of leaving high school, compared to 52% of the general population. Studies also indicate while approximately 1/3 of autistic individuals enrolled in college, many face barriers towards completion without the appropriate accommodations, support systems, and resources in place. In this episode of Let's Have This Conversation, I sit down with my friend Carol Waldman. She is a passionate advocate for inclusion, diversity, and equity, dedicated to improving outcomes in employment, societal life, and education for neurodivergent young adults as they navigate critical transitions from high school to college to employment to full acceptance into adulthood and societal life. She's also got a background working and advocating on behalf of the California Democratic Party. She's turned her advocacy work from politics to inclusion, breaking down barriers of both acceptance and opening up different avenues of conversation to make progress surrounding this very issue of inclusive acceptance for neurodivergent and others with disabilities. As the parent of a neurodivergent son who completed and graduated from the University of Wisconsin at Madison and traveled independently through Europe and completed a internship in Washington, D.C. Carol has experienced firsthand what is possible when adults are equipped with the appropriate resources, supports, and advocacy. She also understands the many challenges that families face once their school-based resources have been disappeared because their child has aged out of the system, and she's on a mission to make sure that people know that there are resources and support out there when their children reach the age of majority and the systems and supports they're used to are vanished away. Through her volunteerism with Autism Tree and her role as a parent mentor, Carol helps families understand that college and meaningful careers are attainable and sustainable goals for neurodivergent individuals. She's eager to share practical strategies, lessons learned, and resources from her own family's journey, while also helping parents and families build confidence and clarity within their child's own potential. And she joined me this week to have a conversation on how we can relook at the concept of inclusion and acceptance and ensure that people with neurodivergent capabilities and people with disabilities have the pathway to reach their fullest potential. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Carol, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to talk to you about how you're making a difference in the world of education and inclusion and everything in between. It's great to see you, my friend, and happy Monday to you.
Well, happy Monday to you, and I'm thrilled to be on your show.
Absolutely. So, Carol, I wanted to start by asking you about what do you think your definition of a fully inclusive society is? I know you're the parent of a neurodivergent individual, and I know you've been advocating for inclusion in all areas of life for a very long time. So I wanted to start by asking you, what do you think inclusion means today in today's modern context, my friend?
I think it's important from what I see with my son, Andrew, who's 24, is that feeling of belonging. And whether it's in an elementary school, in a classroom, whether it's in a youth group, whether it's with friends or college or in the workplace, that you feel like you belong and that people see you and hear you, and that you're not an afterthought, according to my son, that you're really there, part of the group. And I think also including all differences and learning styles and all types of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And as your journey as a parent evolves with someone with a disability, what do you want parents to know about the journey of raising someone with a disability and breaking down those barriers to inclusion if people aren't, every day exposed to raising someone with a disability? What do you think you want them to know?
Well, everyone has their own journey. When you have a child, you have these hopes and dreams that, if you're an athletic family, that child will be the star basketball player, or that they'll be the academic speech and debate king or queen. And I think that when you find out there are some differences with your child, you have to go through a different path. And in the school system, the guardians or parents become much more involved than they would probably need to be for a neurotypical child. And I found myself at lots of IEP meetings, which are individualized education plans. I found myself advocating for him, and to make sure he gets the services he needs throughout all of his education, really, up to 12th grade. And then I feel like the barriers, it's tough because I think at times my son felt underestimated.
Mm-hmm.
You may come across as somebody who learns differently or is quieter. So there's sort of an assumption, well, just get him through his classes. But I had to advocate. Andrew wanted to go to college, so I had to advocate for him to take harder classes, to get the credits to graduate, and to reach his goals that he had in mind, no matter what other people said or thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Carol, as someone that's lived with cerebral palsy my entire life, I know the important work that goes into navigating the transition from high school to college to employment. And I know that is a large part of your work, my friend, helping neurodivergent adults with that transition. So I'm curious, what continues to inspire you to be so dedicated to the cause and this mission itself, my friend? Because I know, as I always tell people, when you have a disability, it's not like you have a 50% off policy and you can't take it back to a department store, right? So tell me about the importance of advocating for a successful transition from high school to college to employment, my friend. What do you want people to know?
You're right, you can't return, but we can learn about acceptance. And so what happened was when Andrew made it to college and he went to University of Wisconsin-Madison and graduated, I thought that, well, he has a college degree. He's going to be fine, that he would not need extra supports in interviewing or that he wouldn't have as much trouble finding a job. But I started to realize soon enough that as he was going through interviews, it became more challenging to get a job. And I wondered, are there resources out there that can help neurodivergent individuals, whether it's transition programs, whether it's mentoring, whether it's coaches, whether it's neurodiversity in the workplace, whether they're agencies that place neurodivergent workers. I have a background in government and politics. I worked for the California state legislature for many years and in the Democratic Party, so I know how to advocate. So I thought, you know what? I'm still in politics, but I am going to advocate among this community because my work isn't done until I see that the neurodivergent community is recognized and also included, really.
Mhm.
I didn't plan for him to go into the workforce saying I'm neurodivergent with a big sign on him, but I also didn't know how hard it would be. So I feel like I'm not alone. And I started to talk to other parents and I said, is there a resource page? Where can I find this information? And I couldn't find it all in one location. So I thought, I'm going to start this page and see, keep adding, but find out what is out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Andrew's a great example because, as you mentioned, he did graduate from college. He's also traveled in Europe and completed an internship in Washington, D.C. And, I'm curious to ask you, what lessons did all of those accomplishments by Andrew teach you about his resilience, his perseverance, and how did that change the way you viewed your advocacy role as well, my friend?
Sure. When he got into University of Wisconsin, it's a big school. I didn't plan for him to go there when he was in high school. But he said he loved the sports programs and he thought that he liked football games. He thought that would be a great school for him. And I let him go and I let him take this risk, and I think one of the lessons I've learned is to let your child, young teenager, adult take risks, as long as they're fairly safe. But it's okay if you fail. It's okay to ask for help. And there's always a way, throughout this process that if it doesn't work one way, you try another way. With traveling, I was pretty nervous when he went to travel. He went with a travel group, Kontiki Travel. It had a lot of young people, but he didn't know anybody. But he did it, and he went 4 weeks with a group. And later he went to Australia by himself, and I was nervous too. But I also know that had to let him, he was confident enough to plan it and is great at traveling. So I had to let him do it. The internships, the one he did in Washington, D.C. one of them was with Broad Futures, which helps train and mentor young neurodivergent employees in the workplace. So I felt comfortable with him there. But still, living in Washington, D.C., I held my breath a few times because I think that you want the people to grow up, your kids to grow up, but it's still scary out there because you just don't know what is out there. But I also wanted him to challenge himself. So I would say let them challenge themselves. Don't underestimate them. Ask for help and keep researching and looking for what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carol, I also wanted to ask you about self-directed independence and how your advocacy work and resources have taught you about the belief of the potential of young people and having self-directed advocacy with some support when needed. But how important is it to also believe in their potential and the transformative outcomes that comes from that belief? So what lessons do you want employers, educators, and the general public to understand about supporting neurodivergent young adults after the age of 18? What do you think people need to know?
Well, one of the things I like to tell people for sure is when they're in high school to prepare them. If the goal is to go off to college and for independence, that they start to learn how to advocate for themselves, even at their own IEP meetings, but also that they learn these skills: getting up, making your breakfast, figuring, responding to teachers, making sure you know what you're responsible for to the best you can. And then in college, it's a whole different set of independent skills, and that's challenging. Sometimes you just learn as you go. But I think when I look back at Wisconsin, it was a big school. I do wish that there had been more services to help Andrew. We ended up getting some of them privately to help with life skills, but to learn how to, work with your roommate, to make sure you keep your dorm life, clean, that you're advocating for yourself. You still need those reminders. So I wish there was more there. And I also think, but the program he worked with was very good. It was called Canopy College and Counseling. But I think this next step into the workforce, I wish that there's more practice with even interviewing and prepping for the jobs. And then, of course, from the college level or wherever, the young adult is in their life. But I think for the workplace, the accommodations, maybe if you're interviewing, a lot is on Zoom, that maybe you give the candidate the questions beforehand. Or if the candidate's not making eye contact, don't disregard that candidate because there's not eye contact. Because there's probably there's a lot of strengths there. Recognizing the strengths of individuals, and then once in the workplace, working to see what does that new employee need, to being flexible, as long as the work is being done and it's the right fit, it can work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important sometimes to fit the person or fit the job to the person rather than fitting the person to the job, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going through my own advocacy journey and going through this. So, Carol, I'm 37 now, so I've been through the advocacy journey with cerebral palsy. It feels like my entire life because it's a never-ending conversation when you're advocating for inclusion. But I'm curious, for you as a parent, and what's your message to parents about, trying to overcome the attitudinal barriers of the public and preserving and employing the bandwidth you have as a parent, because sometimes you have to learn how to pick your battles because there's only so much bandwidth you have as a parent. So talk to me about attitudinal barriers. How do you think we can get over those from a societal perspective, and what do you want parents to know about the importance of prioritizing the issues that are important to their family? What do you want people to know, my friend?
It's been interesting because I have three, I've raised three kids, and I always thought, wow, this is just so hard. But I didn't realize, I knew that having a child with autism was really, really hard, but I don't think my friends knew so much. Maybe I would share, but I was very careful. We didn't really talk about it so much. So I don't know if they realized how much of a struggle it was. I think we were able to get support with our temple, and our community was able to recognize to include Andrew. I felt like, I mean, I was exhausted a lot. There weren't a lot of parents for me to talk to at the time, because this is before the big explosion of social media and so many different support groups. They were just starting. So I think that is really, really helpful now. I wish I'd had more of that. I think that having his two siblings was really helpful, with Andrew. I think that, we just did things as a family, and we did what we could. I think as he moves through to this next phase, throughout high school and through these next phases, it's going to be, it's sort of the unknown, right? For me as a mother, and I just wanted him to graduate college and go off and find a job and be done, but you're not. And so I am learning that there are barriers, and he'll have to find his people. He'll have to find his community, what he wants to do in work. He will. I feel like I have a lot of hope for him, but it is more involved than probably, if he wasn't neurodivergent. So I'm still parenting.
Yeah, well, once a parent, always a parent, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I'm also curious to ask you, what practical steps do you think the ordinary public can take, even if they're not exposed to neurodivergence or inclusion on an everyday basis? What steps do you want the public to know that they can take in support of neurodivergent individuals? And what advice would you have for parents going through the same process you went through with Andrew, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, I think, once they start in school, it's tricky, because, groups start and you find, are you included in birthday parties? Are you included in the social groups? A lot of times I found that parents were afraid, they might have Andrew over for a little bit. They loved him. They're so sweet, but they weren't sure, what if he had a tantrum, or what to do. And so either I was invited, or was very short play dates. And I want parents to know that their kids, they learn a little bit differently. They may not have the social skills that others have, but that this world needs, to include young people, or all neurodiversity, right? My example I share a lot. When Andrew was in high school, he played basketball. He loved basketball, but he wasn't the best player. But he still played, worked hard. He was on the junior varsity team. And then when it was time, he was a senior, the coach said to him, I'll put you on the varsity team. And, you won't play unless the games are winning or losing by a lot, because out of fairness for the team, but you're a great participant. And Andrew came home and said, I'm not sure I want to do this. I don't want to be a charity case. And I said, I don't think you're a charity case. I think they really want you on the team. I think because you're a hard worker and you cheer people on, you participate, you're at every practice. And so he decided to play varsity. And one night he did go out there and he made a 3-pointer. And when he did that, the whole school who was there, the crowd went wild. They did the wave. They ran and screamed and clapped and cheered him on. And after that, he was well known on campus. He was on the Instagram, Max Preps. He was on the TVs at campus. And it just, by the coach doing that and letting him play and including him on this team, it changed his whole self-esteem that senior year. So to not write people off, I think is so important. I think in high school, there might have been, Andrew might be afraid to take, afraid to put him in AP classes. What if he struggles? Advanced placement classes. but he wanted to take him. So let him do it, and don't write it off because he did really well.
Well, you never underestimate the power of potential, right?
Right. That's exactly. Do not underestimate their power.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carol, I'm also curious to ask you about what practical questions do you think parents of neurodivergent individuals should ask themselves about, the transition to adulthood before their child gets there? Because a couple of weeks ago, I counseled a parent that had a young guy who has neurodivergent and other disabilities. And I said, one of the questions he asked me was, when should I start advocating for college and after high school? And I said, when your kid is out of the womb, you should start, right? So I wanted to ask you specifically, what practical questions do you think parents should ask themselves before their kids enter adulthood if they're neurodivergent?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think around middle school, I was thinking about, okay, what path is Andrew going to be on? Because once you get to high school, they want to know, do you want your child on the path to graduate, or do you want like a certificate? Like, do you want him to go to college or just graduate high school? So you have to know, do you think your child can handle the classes? And then let's say you try that, and then the child's doing great, and you want to have them apply to colleges later, but you got to make sure the curriculum fits what the colleges are asking for. If you think if they are going to college and you want them to go to a 4-year college, to start looking maybe like even when they're a sophomore, looking to see applying for supports if you want supports for ACT testing or SAT testing. You might want to start when they're sophomore, if there are colleges that they're interested in, what types of support programs they have. More of them now will help with autism, but mostly a lot of them are similar, extra time on tests, separate testing rooms. But if it's a socializing, sometimes the schools have support groups, and you just have to find that out. They didn't so much when Andrew was applying, but I think it's more so now. When Andrew was a sophomore going into a junior, we had him do a program for 2 weeks called College Internship Program, and he lived in a dorm setting because we wanted to see, how do you feel living with a roommate? How do you feel being away from home? And he lived with other neurodivergent teens. It was in Indiana University, and he liked it. And so we thought, okay, but there are skills you'll need to work on, doing your laundry. We learned from that too. So really early on in high school, for sure, you want to start looking at everything. But in middle school, you might have to decide, depending where you live and the curriculum, if you need to start looking what you're thinking about for high school.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carol, I want to know about the Waldman Way and why you created it, my friend, and how it's helped so many people. Because I took a look at the website before we started or sat down this afternoon, and it sounds like it's helped a whole lot of people. So tell me about it, my friend.
Sure. I wanted to get resources together because you asked this question, well, what happens in the transition to adulthood? And I didn't know. I only knew sort of that traditional path, you go off to college, but I didn't know, well, wait, you could take a gap year? There are these programs out there. So I wanted to, but mostly I wanted a resource page to what happens in the employment world as well. I wanted to know, are there placement companies? Are there coaches? Is there neurodiversity in the workplace support? I wanted to know, are there college counselors who help with neurodivergent individuals, and who are they? So I would meet with them and talk to them. And there's like more coaching services that I've been learning about as I've been going through this journey of, finding out the resources. But I also am very interested in advocacy. So I want to advocate for legislation that helps this community, particularly in the transition to workplace. Because a lot of times when you're 18 or 22, depending what state or country you're in, a lot of the services drop off. And so parents are figuring it out with their young adults what to do. So I wanted to have a website that they could go to, and I'm still building it.
Well, one step at a time. There's no need to rush because it's an ongoing conversation for sure. But one of the things you mentioned is that employment still remains a barrier, and I'll give you a little bit about my personal long story. So, Carol, when I graduated college back in 2010, I wanted to be a sports reporter, and I went on 10 consecutive job interviews. And at the time when I graduated school in 2010 and going into 2011, I went on 10 consecutive job interviews, and I was told I was qualified, but because of a lack of resources, newsrooms were hesitant to hire me. So out of college, I interned at a local television station for 4 years, and I fell into public speaking by accident because I found out that people wanted me to tell my story, and that's how I make money now. But I'm curious to ask you about the progress we've made from employing folks with disabilities, whether they be neurodivergent or not, and where do you think progress still needs to be made, my friend?
I think definitely having more neurodiversity hiring programs. One example in San Diego, I went to, they have the County Board of Supervisors, and I went and spoke at the board meeting on behalf of getting them to hire and train more neurodivergent employees. So if we had more companies willing to do that, as well as people willing to advocate for that, because that's also how it gets done. But I think more companies and more awareness, I think would be very helpful as well. But yeah, I think there's definitely needs to be more done to support the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Carol, how do you think your advocacy work on behalf of Andrew has reshaped or refocused your vision or a concept of effective leadership and really innovation in the workforce and the concept of resilience? What do you think advocacy has taught you about leadership, resilience, in the way that you look at effective sort of organizational culture?
Well, it's interesting because I've done so much advocacy work on, women's issues, education, children, healthcare. Back, when I worked for the state legislature and for doing work in the Democratic Party and campaigns. And now that I'm helping this community, the people I worked with and the Democratic Party is even more aware. Like I'm going to speak at a Democratic club about neurodiversity. And I don't know that would have been the case before. So I feel like getting the word out, and I'm also much more open about it. I don't think when Andrew was growing up, I didn't talk about it so much. It was something that I was taught not to talk about from, generations of shame, but it wasn't their fault. They just didn't, families they didn't know that it was okay to talk about. But it's not only just okay, it's important. And the more I talk about it, even among my social friends, somebody always knows someone who's having challenges and needs some help. And I think that advocating, me sharing, look, this has happened to me. This is our family, and we're going to make a difference in this world. And I think it just helped me focus, on this next chapter of my life as my kids are getting older, that this community needs much more support. And instead of just being quiet, and I want to make sure there is more opportunities for like yourself, for so many people, that they have the resources to employ you in the jobs that you want to be in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the funding, and that we get the funding, right? Like elected officials, elect the right elected officials to support these causes.
Yeah, and to that point, since you brought it up, in the States, I always say that diversity, equity, and inclusion under this current administration is going under sort of what I call an extreme home makeover. And it's a really unfortunate event when we talk about the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm curious to get your perspective on how we'd restore the importance of these conversations at the executive and employment level. And where do you think we can start to make progress in this arena again, my friend?
Yeah, that was part of what happened in Washington, D.C. when Andrew was out there working. The companies, were not allowed to have that as to use those phrases. Even the nonprofits, have had to be careful how they word diversity and equity and not being able to use that. And I think that's really been challenging. But, I think that as we elect people who are much more supportive of this diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we can have it back. But I think that talking about it and educating people about it, because people really, neurodiversity is part of that. And, unless you really understand what is going on, you don't really get it. And so again, I'm going, like, I'm still involved in the Democratic Party. I have some leadership roles. I'm going to go, there's a disability committee. I'm just going to keep advocating and telling people, because, even my friends who don't have kids who are neurodivergent, if they hear me speak, at least they know that what's going on. And it's really education.
Well, it's a never-ending process of education, absolutely. And I've got two questions left for you. And the first of these two questions is this: living with a disability myself, I always know about the drawbacks of social isolation when you have a disability. That's one of the reasons I started this podcast as an arm of social connection. And I'm wondering your thoughts on the importance of building social communities and connections for people with disabilities, neurodivergent people, and for parents as well. So how important is social connection and relationship building, my friend?
Oh, it's so important. It is. I was just talking to somebody about this weekend, that, you've got these young adults at home, and where they need people, we need these connections, and finding groups like that have, not just neurodiversity, but neurodivergent groups, but also that do fun things, that go to baseball games or festivals, whatever they like to do. And then I think for parents, that's one of my, I was thinking about that too, because just because my son's 24, I want to know, he's an adult, what are other parents doing? What is out there for us, how can we support each other, particularly in the job world,
Mm-hmm.
connecting with other parents, at different companies, because they may have neurodivergent young adults as well, but really connecting through these groups. But we need more of them. We definitely, it would be great to have more.
Well, we always want more, don't we?
We always want more. I would say, there are some on Facebook and
Mm-hmm.
social media, and I've looked at those. But sometimes, it could be a lot when you're trying to focus on so many different areas with your kid or young adult.
Yeah, fair enough. And, Carol, my final question is about legacy. It's how I end all of my podcasts. And I'm curious when, this work is over for you and you've reached the end of your professional and personal life, how do you want your legacy to be defined? And what do you want people to most remember about you, my friend?
I think, and I think about myself, that I always say that I've made a difference, but I've also that I spoke out on behalf of what I believed in, and that I am there for you.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that, yeah, that I've made a difference, particularly in the neurodivergent community, but I'm there, I've been there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, my friend, tell me if people want to get connected with you, what's the most efficient way they can do that, my friend?
The website is thewaldmanway.org. And I have a LinkedIn account as well, Carol Waldman, but it will link you to those accounts from the
Yeah,
website.
yeah, absolutely. Well, Carol, I want to thank you for the good work that you've done in both politics, advocacy, and inclusion, my friend. Andrew's lucky to have you in his corner, and I want to thank you for all of the good work that you've done in the advocacy and inclusion space. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I want to thank you for being here today. It's most appreciated.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here and connect and meet you, Kevin. And I look forward to staying in touch and how you're doing and how we're doing.
Absolutely. I always say that life is a constant game of connection, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. I'm really impressed with your podcast. I've been listening to it. So it was an honor to be a guest here.